Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. Is smoking so dangerous that our government should strictly limit it? How far should the government go in telling people what risks they can take? Joining us to sort through the consensus and the conflict are Peter Huber of the Manhattan Institute, Walter Berns, professor of government at Georgetown University, Richard Daynard, professor of law at Northeastern University, and John Banzhaf, professor of law at George Washington University. The topic before the House, smoking. Is Big Brother becoming Big Nanny? This week on Think Tank. It is estimated that 400,000 Americans die of smoking-related diseases every year. Still, 1 in 5 Americans continue to smoke. Every year, 46 million smokers voluntarily spend $48 billion on an activity which is likely to harm them. The evidence is not new. It's been very public since the 1964 Surgeon General's report on smoking and health, a report which triggered a tobacco control movement that has become a major social and political force. Today, every pack of cigarettes carries a warning label. Cigarette advertising is banned on television. Instead, the airwaves carry anti-smoking public service announcements.
Don't smoke. It'll drag you down.
The anti-tobacco campaign has had success. 40 million Americans have stopped smoking since 1965. The percentage of adults who smoke has dropped from 42% to about 26%. Recently, the anti-smoking campaign has been stepped up. 600 localities have outlawed smoking in public places. McDonald's has banned smoking in its company-owned restaurants. 600 shopping malls forbid smoking, and 20 Major League Baseball parks prohibit fans from lighting up. And now, a new bill before the Congress would effectively ban smoking in all public places. Called the Smoke-Free Environment Act, it would, and I quote, prohibit the smoking of cigarettes, cigars, and pipes within any building entered by 10 or more individuals at least 1 day per week. Violators would be fined $5,000 per day. But is the government going too far this time? Critics point out that the risk of getting lung cancer from secondhand smoke is slight, about the same as that of developing colon cancer from drinking chlorinated water or getting killed in a bicycle accident. And what about hang gliding? What about a 3-martini lunch? The smoking debate raises a larger question that has bubbled through the intellectual community for a generation and more. How much risk should government try to control in people's lives? Liberals generally want the government to protect people from risk, which often ends up limiting their free choices. Conservatives generally prefer to let people take greater risks but expect them to bear the full consequences. Our first question, Mr. Peter Huber, is the United States of America in danger of becoming the nanny states of America?
The drift is certainly in that direction. The conservatives want to protect us from abortion and pornography and other liberal ills, and the liberals want to protect us from tobacco and all sorts of other things of that ilk. That's definitely the trend.
Are we becoming the nanny state?
Maybe we are, maybe we're not, but I don't think it has anything to do with the issue on smoking, either secondhand smoking or active smoking, because of the 46 million Americans who you say are voluntarily smoking, they're certainly actively smoking cigarettes, maybe 40 million of them have made an adult choice as to whether to smoke or not. Their adult choice is not to smoke. They started smoking as kids, and the reason they're still smoking is that they're hooked and can't figure out how to get unhooked. So we're not talking about, in any substantial degree, overriding, having the state or the federal government override adult choices.
Let's talk not about people hurting themselves, but about people hurting other people, because that is the
innocent third parties. Right?
Innocent third parties.
Right. 53,000 Americans, by 5 different estimates, die each year of somebody else's tobacco smoke. That is more than all the people who die in auto accidents, about twice as many who are shot in all of the robberies across the country.
Do you believe in those
Whatever
numbers?
the numbers, I'm perfectly willing to accept that some number of people are hurt by secondhand smoke, and I think the case for regulating public places, truly public places, is a very legitimate one. I mean, you own an airport or a public space collectively, of course you're going to have some collective regulation either way, and majority should rule. But I do resist the notion that the government can just define everything in creation as public. I mean, McDonald's has made the decision on their own, good for them, but it sure isn't a public space. McDonald's is a private one. They've decided to ban smoking. They're absolutely within their rights, and if Burger King wants to have it your way and let people smoke there, why
But
shouldn't
OSHA
they?
regulates all kinds of things in McDonald's. They regulate sexual harassment. They regulate discrimination. Now, you want to go roll back the clock 30 years and get the government out of any private
Professor,
business.
well, that's
you've got a heck of an argument.
That's a rather good
Walter,
idea.
yeah, right.
That's a rather
Why not
good
let
idea.
people choose between McDonald's and Burger King? There's room enough for both.
Professor Banzhaf,
Yes.
it has been reported to me that you have said, if it were up to you, a child living in a house whose parents smoke should be regarded as a victim of child abuse.
No, that's not what I said. What I have said.
What do you think about
and
that?
I've
What do you think
convinced
about that
judges
idea?
In 12 different states.
Yes.
That smoking by a parent should be a factor in custody disputes. More than half a dozen parents have lost custody because they've been smoking around children, and recently a case of child abuse by an outside third party, a physician made a complaint under child abuse, the child was removed from the house. Not in all cases. But when those children are rushed, as they have been, in serious respiratory distress in hospitals, unable to breathe because of asthmatic conditions, and the parents continue to smoke around them, then I think the state has as much right to step in as they do when children are left in unsanitary conditions or left alone for a period of time or exposed to lead-based paint.
How about the private smoker in his own home? What right, I mean, if the government put a tax on abortion clinics or said, look, we're not going to outlaw abortion, but we're going to discourage it strongly, surely you'd agree there'd be real problems with that if there is a constitutional right to abortion. How is it very fundamentally different to put something bad into your body or to have a surgical procedure or to take a drug perhaps for if you're HIV positive, an experimental drug? Why isn't there
Well,
more?
Peter, nobody
Why
has
shouldn't we have
argued
more
that an
personal
adult
autonomy?
should not be permitted.
But you'd like to tax it? You'd like
let me
to,
give you your answer.
Do you fellows
Nobody
here
has
think, do you fellows here think that high taxes, really high taxes, become a vehicle that says this is a luxury that only rich people can afford?
No, because in virtually every country in the world, the tax rate on cigarettes is much higher than it is now. If we increase the tax rate to $2 more a pack, which is the highest anybody's asked for, we would still only be in the middle.
Let me ask if we can't perhaps reach agreement on something here.
Yeah.
I will grant you that the public space and the external harms, whatever they are, and one can debate about what is a public space and how much external harm there is, are legitimate reasons for government intervention. Would you not at the same time then reciprocally affirm, really affirm, not pseudo-affirm, but the private right to smoke without being taxed to death, without being harried to death, without being lectured, just I mean, cut the taxes for purely private smoking, okay, and also to engage in a dialogue among consenting adults, no advertising toward kids, so that Marlboro or whoever else who wants to can try and pitch cigarettes to the consenting adult in the private sphere, whatever that sphere is. Would you not wouldn't endorse that?
The problem is that 90%, well, I'd give you a little bit of it. First of all, you're not acknowledging that 90% of adult smokers would devoutly wish not to be smokers.
Well, let us acknowledge that. I mean,
Okay.
I let us acknowledge that, and you should also acknowledge you can get your nicotine addiction from lots of things other than tobacco, like patches and gum today. But that's beside the point. Let's acknowledge that and look toward the future.
Nobody acquires the addiction that way.
No, you
that's
use
the
that
way
to
it-
quit
you can kick it, so it doesn't
getting
matter. You
hooked,
can get
yeah.
your nicotine from other sources. You don't have to smoke to
Right.
satisfy this addiction. So it's not, you
Right.
can get
Okay,
it.
what's your bottom line? You
So
think
the
there's a
bottom line,
right to
would you-
smoke?
well, surely in private, can't we get the government
not-
off the back of the private smoker in the private space, whatever that private
I don't
space
think the
may be?
government is on their
Well,
back.
they're heavily taxed, and we're
No,
urging.
compared with cigarettes in the United States 30 years ago, the effective tax rate is less than half
It's
of what
higher
it was
than
30
virtually
years
half the
ago.
product we
Professor Berns, our
Wants to make a
constitutional
simple
scholar,
point here.
wants to make a point here.
First,
and
a
I
simple
want to
point,
try to
and then a
understand.
constitutional point, okay?
yeah.
The first point, to say that the government is not on the backs of smokers, I think ridiculous. All over the city of Washington, one sees these little groups of smokers huddled around an ashtray outside an office building. Smokers today are not the most abused minority in this country, but they certainly are the most despised minority in this country.
You are a smoker.
It depends on
By the way,
when you
John-
ask that question of me.
Even John Stuart Mill says it's
hold
okay
on.
to despise people. That's not the issue.
Well,
and we don't. I mean, that's not the point on the thing. The point on the thing is it's the smoker who wants...
I now want to get to my constitutional point again.
But I want to ask you a personal question first. How do you feel these days as a smoker? Do you, are you regarded as a social leper?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. To be precise, in my office building at Georgetown University not so long ago when I was in a smoking mode, the police suddenly arrived at my door, having been called by a colleague down the hall who complained about I think largely complained about the fact that I was smoking, not that she was suffering from the smoke, although she claimed that.
Were you violating campus rules?
Yeah, sure.
So you are violating the rules, and now you complain that somebody's enforcing them.
Well, I'm not.
Isn't that a strange thing to happen at Georgetown?
But shouldn't the campus have a right to set its own rules?
The campus did not decide. The city of Washington decided.
Okay,
the
which is a
campus
separate
and the campus is making all kinds of exceptions for older, revered professors. I was not among them. Who have
Not old enough or not revered?
The latter. But maybe I get to the constitutional.
Yes,
point.
I want to ask you this question, Walter. Consider not just smoking, but consider the whole thrust of federal policy and governmental
what I
policy.
wanted.
What has
You
happened in
mentioned-
this country in the last half century?
You mentioned earlier, or someone mentioned, perhaps it was you, John, sexual harassment. That's now a federal offense. So the question arises again, just as it does with respect to this proposed anti-smoking in public places throughout the country legislation. What is the constitutional authority for the federal government to do this? I have no complaints about local legislation because I regard this sort of thing as a local matter. But for the federal government to do it, it seems to me it has to violate the Constitution of the United States. What I find interesting is there have been reports of this anti-smoking proposal by the federal government. I have not seen in any newspaper or press reference to the proposed legislation a query about the constitutional authority.
Because nobody other than people like yourself who want to go back to
and
40
like
years
myself,
of law
people
think
like
of it as an
myself have a
Maybe
reverence
right.
for the Constitution of the United States and the necessity for our own good health to follow the forms of the Constitution of the United States.
We have in this country local option on alcohol, which is also a dangerous, addictive drug for some people. What would be wrong with having local option on banning cigarettes?
Well, I'm not sure we have local option on drunk driving. We certainly don't have a local option on, in effect, on driving over a particular speed limit. And I would think Congress...
but you can't do any. You can't.
I would think some
you
state would
can't. You
decide
can't drive drunk until you consume alcohol.
Yeah,
And there
but
are counties where you either have to bring in your own brown bag or you can't get a drink at a restaurant.
Oh, well, I think that could certainly... No, since nobody is pushing for a national or even local ban that I know of on the sales or consumption of cigarettes, that I think the analogy
What would your next
fine.
step if you got this bill be? I mean, and my experience in Washington is the slippery slope experience, which is you get one thing and then bingo, you want something else.
Well, this bill, I think, essentially
This is the end. This is the end.
No, I'll tell you what, it's because I testified on it just a couple of days ago.
Right.
There's a bill in Pennsylvania which would prohibit smoking in any motor vehicle where there's a child 15 years of age or under, because we now know, in addition to the heart attack and lung cancer and so on, secondhand tobacco smoke is deadly dangerous for young kids, particularly those with asthma, hay fever, and sinusitis.
Even with the windows open.
Yes, even with the windows
listen, John.
open.
Can you give us a list of all the other things in our society that propose potential harm that the federal government ought to...
I can't.
This is a
Being a
state
Christian
bill.
scientist
State
is
bill.
very dangerous to your...
Excuse me?
Being a Christian scientist is very hazardous to the health
That's
of your children.
protected by the First
Being a
Amendment.
Jehovah's
Smoking
Witnesses.
isn't.
These people are people who say that my child is my child. I don't want them to have a blood transfusion. I don't want them to see a doctor, and it can kill a child.
But don't you
A
know
certain-
that
a
the courts
certain number of
overrule
children-
that?
No, they don't.
Always
John,
overruled.
They're not.
Let
That's
him
just
finish.
false. That's just wrong.
John, just
That's
hold
just
on a
not
minute.
true.
Peter, say it again. I wanna hear it.
People do many things to their children, which I have two small children, and I would never do to my children. I think would be disastrous.
Do you smoke?
No, I don't smoke, and I don't stuff my kids with sugary foods and so on, but other parents do. And at some point we have to sit back and say, look, we know best for our kids, but do we really trust the federal government or John Banzhaf to make the right call every time? I mean, if they can do smoking now, and I happen to agree with them, I wouldn't expose my kids to tobacco. So what's next?
We just went through the Brady Bill on gun control, and everybody said, hey, the Brady Bill is a wonderful thing. The Brady Bill is just a little old thing. It isn't going to do anything. It wasn't 48 hours before, and I happen to support the Brady Bill. And by the way, because I have 2 adult children who still smoke, as well as 1 son-in-law, I am philosophically sort of on this side, but practically sort of on your side. But it wasn't 48 hours that the Brady Bill was passed when they started saying, and for the next step we now do this and this and this and this, which I also may support. So to say that there is no sort of progression.
Well, no, we didn't say that. What I say to you, and I think this is true for any bill, you debate a particular bill or an issue on its merits. We may ban smoking in A and B. We may not do it in C and D. The fact that I may want to go to C and D doesn't mean I'm going to get it.
The argument is, what about the principle that parents, within a large range of discretion, get to decide what's good or bad?
That is
kids?
true.
I'm a parent. I don't want my kids to smoke. I'd love them to grow up in a smoke-free world, but I am even more scared of the notion that you and the federal government combined can tell me what's
Okay,
good,
and the ones
good for
where
my
we're
kids,
already
okay?
doing it are you got to put your child in a seatbelt or restraint harness. You cannot use hard drugs around your child. In many cases, you're going to get drugs around your child. You cannot leave your young child alone for more than a few hours. You cannot keep them on
And it's too much. And it's too much. That's exactly
Well,
what
you want to roll back the clock just like Walter does.
Let's just do what we just do what we just did, but separately. You do yours and you do yours instead of at the same time.
Okay. I gave him a long list of situations where the law routinely prohibits parents from doing things which endanger their children. And Peter, having worked on these cases, I can tell you in case after case, courts have overruled even the strongest First Amendment religious objections and ordered blood transfusions where necessary, not to protect the adult, but to protect the child because they are innocent children.
And the problem that what we are debating here is, has this list gotten too long? Okay, when do we draw a line? When do we say enough's enough? Not every parent's a perfect parent. Many parents do things that really are foolish with their kids. Some take them rock climbing. Some feed them bad food. Some feed them too much food. Despite what you just said, many courts have in fact affirmed the parents' right to decide within very broad limits what kind of medical treatment the kids get. We should draw a line.
Walter, do your children smoke?
No.
Would you like to see, and I assume you're pleased that they don't smoke?
Yes.
And I envy you. Would you like to see a federal government that was powerful enough to put forth a propaganda campaign so powerful that you damn well knew they wouldn't and your grandchildren wouldn't?
No, I think I would not, because I don't like that kind of propagandizing from the government with respect to practically anything.
But look, within broad limits, and propaganda, if you, shades of Goebbels is a bit much, but within broad limits, sure, the federal government can educate people.
And also notice that we
they
presently have a $4 billion education program on smoking. It's paid for by the tobacco companies, and it's called their advertising and promotion budget, and it's a pro-smoking propaganda campaign. The government spends a few million.
It's not paid with tax dollars.
Okay, but we do have exactly what you're talking about. We have it in California. It's paid by a tax on cigarettes, and it has caused a dramatic drop in smoking, particularly among kids. So it works.
You also have a dramatic increase on taxation of cigarettes in Canada, which has caused a massive black market.
But think for a minute why. Right? The reason why is because ours tax is so low compared to this. If we raise our tax $2 a pack, the butt-legging problem will virtually disappear.
There is something I absolutely agree with you with.
Well, good.
I want to make a point about this discussion in general, which is that each of the proposals that are coming forth from the public health movement on tobacco, whether it's to eliminate smoking in public places or to raise the tax up to global levels on cigarettes, or to limit smoking around kids. These proposals each have their own merits. It's not like it's a slippery slope, that if you buy one proposal, you're automatically committed to the others. We're in a country, I know some of you may not like it, but we're in a country in which there's a tremendous amount of regulation. There has been, there will continue to be a tremendous amount of regulation. So the real context of this show, of the questions here around cigarettes, are whether in this environment in which there is and will continue to be a tremendous amount of regulation, is there too little, too much, or the right amount of regulation for cigarettes? And the answer is very clearly, in this context, there's too little on a broad range of things, and we all know how it happened. The tobacco companies, the southern state senators from the tobacco growing region have had tremendous political power, and they have managed to keep Congress from taking the kinds of effective steps to protect the public that you would expect.
I keep coming back to Walter. We saw that chart here that showed the percentage of people who smoke going way down.
Yeah.
You and your sort of neoconservative colleagues, among whom I frequently count myself in your number, that chart says to me one thing: social engineering works. Now, you generally don't believe that social engineering works. You don't like social engineering.
Well, why do you say I don't believe that it works?
I said two things. I said that it doesn't work and you don't like it.
I believe it works.
Aren't you glad that it went down?
Hold on.
I have no doubt that the campaign against cigarettes that really began back in really the 1950s, as I recall, when smoking the first started poison.
65.
No, before, well, whenever it started.
Right.
It certainly has worked. And I suspect now that smoking is to a large extent a class thing now, isn't it?
right.
You know.
Yes.
And people like you, Ben, you intellectuals who read the evidence and so forth, you're persuaded by it.
No, I am a world-class Guinness Book of World Records hypochondriac. That's my reason.
You have heard the evidence. You've read the evidence. You have been engineered, and you've stopped smoking. And there are others in this country who don't pay attention to that, or whatever reason, they continue to smoke. So I really think it's a class thing. So this works. And I'm all in favor of that warning on cigarette packages and so forth. I'm in favor of taxing cigarettes. Whether I'm in favor of a $2, additional $2, that's something else. But if I may, I want to respond to something here. The argument has been made several times here. Why cannot we simply address this question of smoking? Why does Peter, for example, bring up other things? Why do I bring up other things?
You are afraid that we are going to go to a regulatory, near totalitarian state if you
what
go
will
down
happen
that.
is, if in the future the argument will be something else. Popcorn, for example. If you can do it with cigarettes, why can't you do it with popcorn? Just as you've been making the argument, we can do it with cigarettes because we do it with seat belts. I mean, that's the argument we've been making here.
Okay, hold on. I would like to try, after this very vigorous discussion, and it has been vigorous, an experiment. Could we go around the room briefly? Because notwithstanding some of the heat that's been generated here, I sense there is a certain amount of agreement. And I would like you each, briefly, underscore briefly, and I'll just go around the room this way, to try, for the benefit of your ignorant moderator and our viewers, to tell us what you think this panel agrees on and what you disagree on. And keep it brief. Peter.
The panel at least purports to agree on the strictly private right of the strictly private smoker to continue smoking, and there's a fair amount of agreement that the public spaces, the truly shared spaces, whatever they may be, have to be regulated collectively, and if the larger community wants no smoke there, that's what the larger community should get.
Walter?
I think we all agree that smoking is bad and that an effort ought to be made to discourage it. We disagree as to what form this discouragement should take, whether the decision not to smoke should be a private decision or whether it should be a public decision, and if it's a public decision, as to whether it should be, that sort of regulation should be done by the federal government, which I say has no constitutional authority to do it, or by the local governments.
John?
I think we all agree that secondhand smoke is harmful to some effect or other. I think we all agree that it is appropriate to protect, therefore, other persons, that is non-smokers, from it, at least in public places or where the public is invited to go, by which I take it to mean businesses like McDonald's.
No, we don't agree on that. I flatly said the opposite.
Well, I thought you would agree that at least in public places people can be protected. Right. I think we also agree that it can be taxed, at least to the extent that we can tie the tax revenues to the cost of the economy, although we disagree as to what those costs are.
Dick?
I think we all agree that we don't want our kids to smoke and that it's perfectly appropriate for the government to take, I think, even strong measures to keep our kids from smoking and to keep the tobacco companies from exerting their wiles to try to persuade our kids to smoke.
We thank you for that note of clarity, and we thank the panel, Mr. Huber, Professors Berns, Banzhaf, and Daynard, and to our viewers, thank you. You know, this is a new program, and we would like to hear your comments. Please right to the address on the screen. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.